Hey everybody, happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you guys have an amazing 4th of July, but be careful. I mean, you know who you are. You guys like fire, you're a little pyro. Just be careful. We want to see you next weekend with all your fingers and toes and no burn marks. So it's going to be an awesome weekend, but I hope you have a great 4th. And this weekend we're starting a new series called What I Really Want. And my guess is if I asked you right now to tell me one thing that you really want, I get a lot of different answers. Maybe a nice cold Mountain Dew, or a bowl of ice cream, a new pair of Nikes, or your own room. You're like, get my sibling out of here, right? I think we all can relate to the feeling of really wanting something. And sometimes the things that we really want, they're good for us, and sometimes they may not be. There's actually a word to describe that. The word is temptation. And temptation means wanting to do something that may not be the best for us. And oftentimes when we hear that word, we hear it in a negative way. Doing something wrong, doing everything wrong, saying a bad word, stealing, cheating, something we do in secret, or something that we do when adults aren't around. And when we think about temptation, we think about it as our behavior. We think about it as our choices. We think about it as something that we shouldn't do. But look back with me for 1 second at that definition of temptation. Temptation means the desire to do something that we know is wrong or unwise. See, temptation isn't just things that we do or don't do. Temptation is the desire to want to do that thing. It's a feeling. And sometimes we want something that isn't bad. Sometimes we want to do like a chore so our parents will let us hang out with our friends more often. There are good desires, but I think we all know what it feels like to be tempted to do something that we know we shouldn't do. Maybe it's watching shows or YouTube channels you're not supposed to, telling a lie, downloading an app your parents told you not to, sneaking your phone into your room at night, breaking the rules. There's so many. That kind of temptation has the potential to lead us down a path that may not be the best for us, a path that has consequences. Then after you give in to temptation, you can end up with a lot of questions like, am I a bad person because I was tempted? Am I a bad person because I gave in to it? Why do I want to do the things that I know I shouldn't do? Is God mad at me if I give in to temptation that isn't good for me? And why doesn't God help me out here? Those questions, they're great. They're great, honest questions. They're questions I found myself asking more than once. And that's because temptation is difficult. And unfortunately, experiencing temptation is part of life. It's been that way since nearly the beginning of time. In fact, in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, we learn that God made everything and saw that it was good. And then He made Adam and Eve, the first two humans, and He saw that they were very good. See, Adam and Eve had a special relationship with God. They walked and talked with Him every day. There was no insecurity, no guilt, no comparison, no anxiety, no jealousy in their world. I mean, can you even imagine a world like that? It'd be amazing. But then something happened. Something came in between Adam and Eve and their closeness with God. See, God had given Adam and Eve the freedom to do anything except one thing: eat the fruit from one specific tree. But God's enemy, Satan, convinced Adam and Eve that God was keeping from them something good. He told them that the fruit was really good for them and that they shouldn't trust God or His rule. And Adam and Eve chose to believe Satan, and they chose not to trust God, and so they ate the fruit. Adam and Eve's choice broke their closeness with God, and their sin put distance between them and God. And what's worse is now you and me, we have something in our hearts that causes us to distrust God too. That's why there's always this battle inside of us that we think we know what's best versus what God tells us what's best. That's why a lot of temptations are tempting, because we struggle to trust that God has our good in mind. And the conversation on temptation in the Bible doesn't stop there. So many of the writers in the Bible talk about it a lot. Writers like James. Look at what he said. When a person is tempted, they shouldn't say, God is tempting me. God can't be tempted by evil. And He doesn't tempt anyone, but each person is tempted by their own evil desires. These desires lead them on and drag them away. When these desires are allowed to remain, they lead to sin. And when sin is allowed to remain and grow, it leads to death. Very clearly, James said that God isn't the one who tempts us. Temptation comes from within us. It comes from that desire that started all the way back in Adam and Eve. That desire to do what we think is best rather than what we know God says is best. So, we're tempted by our own desires. And we've got to learn to deal with those desires in a good and healthy way. Because, as James told us, there are consequences if we don't. They have the potential to hurt us or drag us away from God's best for us. You see, God really does want what's best for us. And we can experience God's best when we choose not to give in to temptation that tells us something else is better. In other words, we can experience God's best for us when we resist temptation. You have the power right now, today, this weekend, to decide to deal with your desires in a good and healthy way. You have a choice today to choose God's best for yourself and not let those temptations grow stronger in your life. And as a middle schooler, when you find yourself faced with the temptation to lie to your parents or watch that video on your phone, skip curfew, what do? Well, first, practice identifying what's tempting you. Think about this last year. What bad choices have you made? What was the temptation attached to those choices? Start there. Identify what's tempting you. Then remember that God wants what's best for you. You can trust God. God's not out to steal all of our fun from our life. He doesn't make a bunch of rules because he's on a power trip. He isn't holding out on you. In fact, it's just the opposite. God wants you to enjoy life to the fullest. He wants you to resist temptation, not because he wants your life to be boring or uncool or lonely or dull. He wants you to resist because he has something better for you. So today, guys, remember, we can experience God's best when we resist temptation. I hope you guys have a great weekend. And again, enjoy the 4th. We'll see you next weekend.